On behalf of Letras Latinas, the literary initiative at the University of Notre Dame's Institute for Latino Studies, welcome to the final installment of Season 1 of Curated Conversations, a Latinx poetry show. My name is Francisco Aragon, Director of Letras Latinas, and I'm very pleased to say that today's episode, our 12th, features our most recent winner of the Andres Montoya Poetry Prize, a Letras Latinas initiative which supports the publication of a first book by a Latinx poet residing in the United States. Final judge John Murillo selected Stepmotherland by Darrell Alejandro Holness, which is slated for release any day now with University of Notre Dame Press. Before I introduce Darrell's interlocutor, I'd like to thank a few people. Zach Powers is normally the person I thank at this juncture as our tech guru behind the scenes, and I certainly want to underscore how crucial he's been to the smooth rollout of our first 11 installments. But today, I'd like to extend special gratitude to Emily Holland, who is sitting in for Zach. Emily, in addition to being the author of the poetry chapbook Lineage, is also the editor of Poet Lore, which is the Writers Center's in-house publication and co-presenter of this series, and with whom Letras Latinas aspires to collaborate in some sort of capstone gesture for Season 1. I also want to take a moment to offer special thanks to the Poetry Foundation, whose grant made all of this possible. Their support has allowed us to pay stipends to both our featured poets and their selected interlocutors. A special thanks as well to Jim Wilson, whose generosity has made possible a parallel book club component for the debut books we've been exploring these past 12 months. And let me also say that Duende District Bookstore, run by Angela Spring, is a crucial partner for our book club component, as well as co-presenter of this series. One of the special traits of Curated Conversations is that we ask our debut poets to select their interlocutors. Darrell has chosen Hafisa Jeter. Born in Nigeria, Hafisa Jeter is a Nigerian-American author and editor whose poetry and prose have appeared in the New Yorker, Boston Review, and the Los Angeles Review of Books, among others. She lives in Brooklyn, New York. Of her poetry collection, Un-American, published by Wesleyan University Press in 2020, Claudia Rankine writes, Hafisa Jeter creates a new kind of portraiture. A family is slowly etched in relief in language both lush and exacting. This gorgeous debut troubles and reshapes notions of belonging. She goes on to say, Jeter's poems simmer original forms of witness and resistance. I myself have had the great pleasure of experiencing these lush poems in the days leading up to our time together, while also inhabiting some of the lush spaces in Hawaii. I'd like to wind these remarks down by sharing a favorite piece, one I marveled at for its exquisite deployment of repetition and assonant rhyme, all the while offering what felt to me like a bittersweet portrait that is also moving and poignant. The Widower. 5 winters in a row, my father knuckles the trunk of his backyard pine like he's testing a watermelon. He scolds smooth patches where bark won't grow, breaks branches to find them hollow. He inhales deeply, and the pine tree has lost even its scent. My father, the backyard forest king, the humble king, the dragging his scepter through the darkness king. king who won't lay his tenderness down, trembles into the black, unable to stop his kingdom from dying. Please join me in welcoming Hafisa Jeter.
Thank you so much for that introduction, Francisco. I am so pleased to be here with the Writer Center and with the amazing writer, poet, and playwright, Darrell Alejandro Holness, who is also a dear friend. To start, I'm going to introduce Darrell, then he's going to read, and then we're going to jump into some discussions with some readings intermixed. Darrell Alejandro Holness is an Afro-Panamanian American writer, performer, and educator. And as Francisco mentioned, he's the author of Stepmotherland, winner of the Andres Montoya Poetry Prize. He's on the faculty of the Gallatin School of Individualized Study at New York University. In addition to a chapbook, Migrant Psalms, his writing has been published in English, Spanish, and French in literary journals, anthologies, and other books. He also writes for the stage. Most of his writing centers on love, family, race, immigration, and joy. It's my pleasure to welcome Darrell. He's going to share some poems with us.
Thank you, Hafisa. I'd like to start out by reading When My Mother Gives Up Her American Dream to Marry My Father. She says it was for love, as if the sound of the word blowing in the wind lifts the sails of her white dress and sails her body back to my father on his ship in the Panama Canal. She says it was for love, as if love were a place above the clouds from which she could see the earth rise, blanketed in dark space. A sign, she says, told her for certain that their lives would be wasted if they were spent apart. As if to say, for certain, were to fold ginger lilies into the book of Corinthians on the page with her favorite verse, saving the flora to offer it to a God she hadn't yet met. One day when she'd believe in love again. She always knew it was coming. The harpy on horseback, deity of her dreams, with a gray and white feathered halo for a crown. I never understood a religious offering, giving back to creators something they could so easily take themselves, whether it be taking her lambing for slaughter or taking her dreams deferred of becoming a nurse like Diane Carroll's Julia on US TV stations that my mother watched as a little Black girl in the Panama of the 1960s. Julia's good looks are an act of defiance. Black women on TV were never supposed to be that beautiful. My mother takes note and offers my father her velvet on their wedding night. He crushes it to bring the beauty out of the thing, like all men taught by their fathers to press a grape for wine or a body for blood when it was the only red the village man said he should take for a wife. When she was the best kind of woman the village man said he should take for love. There's always a bit of violence to sacrifice. Flesh crushed under the pressure of other people's expectations, giving life to the machos, the patrones, the pelaos like me. The blow of birthing machismo is only softened by promises of sainthood, promises of power over man now that her only son was going to be one. Today she weeps when I don't go to church and Hail Mary, and longs to return to the sea and a time when the wind blew her dress perhaps in the wrong direction. Tough for a mermaid to swim upstream. Tough for love to be like water, able to sustain you any way the wind blows. These days, she dreams of life at the bottom of the sea. These days, breathing air feels like drowning. This next poem is called Praise Song for My Mutilated World and has a bit of music in it. Ode to the Japanese radio oozing hot tunes in the hot afternoon of my childhood at age 4 in La Ciudad de Panama at my abuelo's house. Ode to the Black women made of air and imagination who Pito and I danced with in his living room in La Rosita, the rosy part of Riabajo, known for turning bullets into blooms. Ode to Laolwa Braz, the early 90s Brazilian siren in Kauma, who seduces us into dancing with our dream girls and away from the bullet-bitten bodies plastered across the front page of La Crítica News. Ode to the famous mulatto melody howling from the bellows of the accordion on the record, and to the Portuguese words I pronounce in near Spanish as I try to sing along to the forbidden dance song. A recordação vai estar com ela onde for. A recordação vai estar para sempre onde for. There isn't much forbidden in my family except piedra and hierba and the tiroteo from their trade. There isn't much forbidden in my family except pistolas y secuestros and chanchudos y corruptos who've become piedras slaves. Pito and I save the negras in our arms from piedreros, drug dealers, and the cartel. With our moreno swing hips, dips and spins to the 2-beat carimbo drum rhythm, stronger than the pulse thumping through my little boy body, until I can't tell the difference between my corazón and the radio's tong-tong, until our dream girls become our real women, until we've praised, danced our world back to being one that little brown Black boys like me can believe in.
Thank you so much, Daryl. That was a beautiful reading. So I want to jump into the conversation. You know, reading Stepmotherland, it strikes you that as a reader, very much from the title itself, that it's very much a book about land and place, but like place as in country, but also place as in one's place in the world, in their community and family. And as the opening poem tells us, literally one's place in one's dream as in an American dream. And I think, you know, for me, the context in which we make art is also supremely important. So I was hoping you could kind of just start off by telling the audience about your upbringing and giving us some context, like, you know, regarding Panama as it relates to the politics and experiences in Stepmotherland around belonging and class and queerness that you're engaging with. So I want to make sure everyone can really engage with you.
Sure. So there are 2 major Black populations in Panama. One is the Negro Coloniales, who are descended primarily from Africans that were enslaved by the Spanish when Panama was a Spanish colony. And the other are the Afro-Antillanos, who are from the West Indies, and they came to Panama to build the railroad and then the Panama Canal. And so the Black relationship with Panama is largely based around labor. Actually, you know, like I'm realizing that as I'm telling you this now. And I am descended from both groups. And I'm also descended from indigenous peoples in Panama as well, the Chocó in particular. When I was growing up in Panama, I had access to these communities, but I also had access to the US American community because of the presence of the US military and its relationship to the Panama Canal. I am from a familia canalera, so I have many family members, including my father, who worked for the Panama Canal. And I actually was the assistant to the chief of security and protection of the Panama Canal, actually, for a little while. So that is many generations of Holnesses working for the Panama Canal. And, you know, like the canal, I think of my family as representing both the United States and Panama pretty much at all times, because some of us were born in the United States, some of us were born in Panama, but we all have that close relationship to both countries and both cultures. And our Blackness is actually a kind of bridge between both communities, because many Blacks who were of West Indian heritage spoke English. And so we were hired to work by the U.S. military on military bases and as well on the Panama Canal. And so that actually gave Afro-Antillanos a perceived privilege over the Negro Coloniales, which also caused tension between the two communities historically. And that privilege also provided a bridge between the Panamanian community and the US community, because depending on the era that we look at, many West Indian laborers were granted certain privileges to US properties, if we wanted to call them that, in Panama that were denied to Panamanian citizens, but many of those same laborers were not granted citizenship. And so, and had a precarious relationship with the Panamanian government. And so to be Black in Panama, I think for a lot of people is to be caught in between these two countries, historically going back for generations, and even now, today. But instead of seeing it as, being caught at a crossroads, I like to think of my identity and my history as a bridge.
Thank you so much. I had other questions, but what you just said makes me think of, it's really interesting what you're saying about your relationship, like the relationship between Blackness and Panama is labor, as it is in America. Blackness is like made this country. But, as you think of labor in this book, I didn't quite connect it to, you said it, that in this book, it's very much, you see bodies in labor, like into the labor of translating oneself and making one legible to the place that they are from and the place that they are visiting, which is really interesting. It's the labor that one does to be understood inside family. And the labor, I think, this is a good way into, this opening poem, which I love, because, it's in this way, even from the title, to give up is a kind of labor too, mm-hmm. And then to give up the American dream, we all know the American dream is, well, some of us now, is labor intensive. And then the labor of a marriage. And so there's actually so much labor happening just before we've even entered the poem. Right. And so I think that is supremely fascinating. And it is also also just a bold statement of a way to open a book called Stepmotherland, when my mother gives up her American dream to marry my father. And yet here you are, in some ways, perhaps the embodiment of the American dream, their American dream, perhaps in some ways. In some ways you've had to kind of expand that. But I'm wondering if you can just kind of maybe just let's enter the collection by having you really talk to us about that poem, just about, just even opening with this. You can take it anywhere you want.
Yeah, absolutely. When I was working on this poem, it took me a while before I landed on Gives Up in the title. I had also played with the idea of surrender, when my mother surrenders her American dream to marry my father. Instead of gives up, we also thought about gives over. And I say we because, I'm always in conversation with someone little market research, how does this sound and how does that sound, et cetera. But I settled on gives up because I saw this image of my mother with her hands in the air, but it's one that ends with her embracing my father. And so for me, there's so much love that comes out of that loss and that I was born into. So it's bittersweet. And I was hoping to capture some of that bittersweet sentiment in the title, because their marriage, is the reason why I'm here, is the reason why I was born. So I I think that there's something really sweet about that, but there is a kind of, there was a loss that then now I think was expected that her children would fill in a way, you know, like the way that we were raised to really look forward to come to the United States before I could even point to it on a map. And I think that there was something really interesting about the kind of sacrifices that we make for love all the time. And they're not just compromises, but I really mean sacrifices that it doesn't matter if it's your first year in a marriage or your 50th, or if there's no marriage whatsoever and it's another kind of relationship. You know, love sometimes really requires sacrifice in order for it to thrive. And I try to honor that sacrifice, you know, with the work of this book and the work of this poem. You know, it's really meant to honor the sacrifice that she made and to celebrate the love that came out of that.
Yeah, I love what you're also saying about like sacrifice, because this is like a book that plays with language and translation and like the duality of meaning. And even in the idea of sacrifice, there's that it can in a way mean its opposite. There's like the sacrifice of like the pain of having to give up, but then there's like the sacrifice as an offering, you know, which is like a really interesting duality because of the way religion and faith plays into your work, that like the tension between like what a sacrifice is and what an offering is, I think is really interesting. And I think that this kind of leads well into my next question. You know, I love John Murillo's intro for the book. And one of the things John says is Stepmotherland provides the reader a fresh perspective on the countless ways in which history, personal nation can, by its very nature, blur the line between witness and participant, between doer and done to. And exactly what you're saying about your mom, like that she is like giving up for love. So she's both the doer and the done to, you know, and with the idea of like the American dream, like as what you said, that you were raised to have it before you could point to it, you know? And so there's like all that duality that I love. And so, I mean, can you kind of just speak to your intention and how you kind of like blur like person and nation, which is like you're literally do in the actual title of the collection as well?
Absolutely. You know, I want to circle back to what you said about sacrifice having that double meaning, because it's something that we also find in Poder. There's a mother that's in a way sacrificing her motherhood by sending her children north. It's something that we also find in Pietà, which is a response to the sculpture, right, of Mary holding the body of Christ. And it's something that it's something that's alluded to in Rihanna and Child as well. And I think it's growing up Catholic, you know, it's sacrifice is a major loss and a reason to cry, but you've also given something up for a greater good, right? Whether it's Christ dying on a cross for the sake of mankind, or in this case, it's my mother sacrificing her American dream, you know, for the dream of a family. And I do think that there is something incredibly religious in a way about that sacrifice, even when it's outside of a strictly religious context, and that there is a way that we worshiped at the Church of the American Dream. And like all matters of faith that are, you know, I think shared with children, when they become adults, they start to question that faith. And when I came to the United States, I started to question the American dream, just like I also started to question my Catholic faith. And I started to question my faith in, you name it. Anything I believed in, I started to doubt those beliefs, which is part of growing up, I think, and making sure that you can claim your beliefs as your own. So I think that there's something that calls back to the way that I received religion, when I was growing up, that you see echoed in these poems around this idea of sacrifice, especially between mother and child. You also asked about the fusion between land and self. And I find it really hard to not think of myself as the way that I think of the Panama Canal, which I know sounds ridiculous. It sounds absolutely absurd, but I think of the Panama Canal, which is a place that I think about a lot because I have this familial connection to it, and I have a historical connection to it. And it was like 7 minutes from my house. When I was growing up, every day I could walk to the Panama Canal. So, and that landmark, that man-made marvel, is one that embodies not just Panama's history or a part of it, but also the history of the world. It's a part of all kinds of transatlantic trade that actually is that goes along the same routes as the transatlantic slave trade. It is part of, I think I remember a statistic loosely, learning a statistic in high school that was something like 85% of what is sold in every major store in the United States has come through the Panama Canal, either as a whole product or as a raw material. And so the legacy of the Panama Canal is everywhere. And I think of every time I'm there and I put my feet in the water, or, I touch a tree that is that lines the banks of the canal, or I'm listening to the locks, push the water back and forth, or I'm watching the ships sail through, I think about all of the history that's at play all at once. And I do think that we are the embodiment of the histories that our families have lived, that have brought us here. And that makes me think a lot about African spirituality and the veneration of ancestors and the kind of respect that Black communities have as a result of that inheritance, the kind of respect and reverence that there is for the elders in Black communities as a part of that. And so when I look at myself, I see the elders. I see, my dad, my mom in my face, but I also see my grandparents and everything they endured, and my great-grands, and et cetera. And so in a way, we are the land, and we've always been the land. And I also think about my Native American heritage, my Chocó Indígena heritage, and the ways that my relationship to the land, consequently, I'm learning really predates colonialism, predates slavery, predates the conquest, right? Through that heritage line. And what does that really mean in terms of me being outside of the land or on top of the land versus me being the land itself? And so I feel like at once I am the land because I am my ancestors, but then I'm also this creature, right? That is using the land, living off of the land, because I am myself and I am now. I am the past and I am now.
Yeah, I mean, what you're getting at, I think both with this idea of sacrifice and land and Blackness, I think that in some ways you're talking very much about precarity, right? Because in some ways precarity, is one of the things that fuses together communities, right? Black communities, like indigenous communities. And then there's the precarity of like Panama as it exists, as in like in the gaze of like empire, and just like in how, with your father working for the Panama Canal, you're also kind of like surrounded by that like specter of empire, the entire time. And so it strikes me that your book is very much a book about precarity and like community and love politically and family, and like how those all intersect, especially as with like the poem, I think, Naturalization and Black Parade. I think you said you're going to read Black Parade towards the end, but I'm curious because you're a playwright, you're a poet, you've like written some songs, men of many talents. And so I'm wondering, can you speak to how specifically you use poetry to bind these investigations around precarity, like political precarity, all the way to just like, the precarity of like the place that you're from, because I like the one thing that you're taught in American schools of like when I grew up was that we're going to have to give that canal back. That's the only thing the history books cared about, was that it was ours. And like, we were going to have to give it back, And so Panama very much existed in the, like we were taught in the imagination that it was something that belonged to us as a tool of like commerce and moving through. And then to live in, to embody that country, like that, in which like heightens exactly what you're saying about like labor and relationship. And so I'm just curious for like, all the genres that you engage with, like, what is it that you find that poetry does for you?
I think poetry for me starts with questions, and it's a space where I'm able to ask all types of questions, including rhetorical questions. And a question that I had when I started writing poems that eventually were part of this collection, before I even found the title, was, can anyone from this continent ever call it our motherland? For all of us, it has become a stepmother, because at least once, if not twice, or many other times, it's been removed from what it used to be that brought us here. And so for me, poetry is definitely a space for me to ask questions, and to really, from there, find words that in some way seem to approximate an answer. When I write plays, I feel like it's more about actions and behaviors. Even though I write very language-heavy plays, I think it ultimately comes down to what it looks like when these ideas are in action. That's what I'm looking for on the stage. And it's one of the reasons why movement and dance are so important to me, and why I like to incorporate that in my plays as well. Because I do wonder what it is like when these questions are in motion. And I try to find ways that can be manifest through gestures, through movement, through style, in a play. And in poetry, I'm doing it more on a language level, and I'm also looking for more questions to ask. I always say that I don't really want answers to my questions. I want more questions, because I know that there's something else that I need to be asking, right? And I just haven't gotten there yet. And that's going to take me to the next step. Answers can sometimes be a place to stop or a place to rest, which is good. But I want to keep going. I want to keep asking questions. I want to keep writing poetry.
I love that. Well, I've got a question for you. Can we hear some more poems?
Sure. This poem is called Cristo Negro de Portobelo. It's when they see me naked that they finally believe I'm from Panama. The crucifix hanging on my black chest underneath the little hair I inherited from my father. Sweats as I perform what priests and their laws call unnatural acts. Only men grow body hair. Only men are this dark. And when my hands finally darkened enough to color even the blackest swans, I was sad to see them suddenly turn into wings. Plumed palms, hollow finger bones, limp wrists. But then again, the struggle of first flight against the moon's night can be a freedom beyond heaven and its wanting eternity. So now, rebellion is my new religion, or something else romantic and American, like a crownless king, perhaps an immigrant one, atop a throne in native disguise. This next poem I'm going to read is called Ferguson, USA. When life gives you strange fruit, you make a sweet champagne, even though to make brew, you have to pay in spades. You take the fruit's strange juice and pour it in a cup. Eat the promised produce like raisins in the sun, or let it hang there ripe and plump for crows to pluck. Let juice ferment to wine, swill it around for luck. Wrap it in paper bags, drop a few in an ice pail, and make your own price tags. Sing out, nutcrackers for sale. And when that cup appears, offer him a cold cup before he sees your fear and tries to lock you up. When white boys are chugging and keg standing this split, when white girls are crying to get another hit, and even their parents are addicted to it. Do you have a permit to sell this strange fruit shit? The cop asks you before he takes a second swig. This time he sips and tastes ambrosia in the brew and sees that he could make the same of me and you. What will you do when he shoots to drain your strange juice? Let the red bullet wound fester like a sore? Then, when your blood's on tap, not take it anymore? In this darker the berry world, in this Eden before the fall, a sweet tooth will lead everyone to splash against a wall.
Thank you so much. So I especially love this poem, Ferguson, USA. And I'm hoping that you can kind of just like walk us through this poem formally, because it's like when you read it on the page, you can see how full of rhyme it is, slant rhyme, half rhyme. But like also for those of us who are paying attention, the amount of just references that have been slid in there. So we're seeing like Billie Holiday, Strange Fruit. We are seeing I'm pretty sure we're seeing Langston Hughes, like Fester Like a Store, right? And then the like Darker the Berry World, that's Tupac, right? And so, but what like is there anything else that I'm missing? I'm sure. Like what, like walk us through this, because this is a fascinating poem. And so I think that's one of the things I also love about this book, that like the way it like balances the like playfulness inside the violence. It's essentially the way that Black people do. It's kind of like, you can go to like a protest where there's a marching band and there's dancing, and like, is it a party or is it a repast? You know what I mean? And so I'm just hoping you can just kind of like talk us through like just like this poem technically.
Yeah, I'll Get Out. It's horror and it's satire. right? And there's a lot of humor in the satire, but at the heart of it is horror. And there's so much about this poem that is the result of my fears, is the result of me being horrified by the way that Black people in this country are gunned down by police. And that's why I titled it Ferguson, USA. There is an element of satire here. The rhyme it takes us back to our childhood. It's supposed to grant us this sense of security and comfort and create an expectation where what's coming next. But the truth is that no matter how many nursery rhymes I heard about the United States when I was a child, or that were from the United States that I heard, none of it prepared me to face this reality here. And so I thought about the way that The Bluest Eye starts out with these like Dick and Jane story. I might be getting the story type wrong, but it's essentially, it starts out with this children's story that points out the way that we learn about beauty and learn about learn a way to see ourselves as children, if we're only exposed to white literature and white children's books. And it takes that element of children's literature and it flips it on its head to prepare us for the journey that we then see Pecola go on in The Bluest Eye. And I think similarly for me, I'm thinking of I'm thinking of my childhood. I'm thinking of nursery rhymes. I'm thinking of those songs. And I'm also, of course, thinking of Langston Hughes. And I'm also, of course, thinking of Billie Holiday. And I'm also thinking of Tupac and everything I love about being seen as African-American, which has a lot to do with the incredible culture and the legacy of Black artists and Black writers from the United States in the world, and how much I learned from them and how much I learned to see myself in their work. So I went back to listening to Billie Holiday's Strange Fruit when Trayvon Martin was shot and the Black Lives Matter movement really caught fire. And I thought about how I figured out a way to deal with this and to navigate it by looking at the work that many African Americans have done, through their art. And so I had to bring in Langston Hughes. I had to bring in Tupac, because it's their work that was sustaining me through that dark time. And there's also a little bit of New York in here with the Nutcrackers for sale, right? If you've ever been to Coney Island, when the cops aren't there, right? And a lot of folks are looking to make a quick buck, you can buy a Nutcracker, which is a kind of juice drink, with a little liquor in it to make you feel all right. So you can enjoy the waves, right? And there's something so subversive about that. There's something, I think, Black about it in the ways that Black people have been oftentimes positioned by society to find creative ways of surviving, whether it's economically or for our joy to survive, right? Emotionally surviving. And I think that there's something really playful about that all. And going back to the Billie Holiday song, she's using figurative language to talk about something that otherwise might be too hard to say, too hard to sing about. It's too hard to look about. It's too hard to think about it, but we still must do it. And even still, as we know, she was blacklisted, literally, and So it like didn't matter how much she coded it. The truth was still too much for some people to tolerate. They couldn't stand to see that song as the mirror that it was for its time. So I think of Ferguson USA as a kind of mirror. You were asking me about other references. In addition to the New York reference with Nutcrackers for Sale, there's also Lorraine Hansberry with Raisin in the Sun, which of course also connects to Langston Hughes. There's the idea of spades that's woven throughout. Ambrosia being the, drink of the gods, the fruit of the gods, and playing with that and connecting that to strange fruit, I thought was really, it just came to be naturally, but I thought it was really interesting and kind of complicated. And it pointed to there being something special about these bodies, right? Something unique, something desirable. Eden before the fall, there'll always be biblical references in my work. So, yeah.
Yeah, I think that like the other thing about, I think this poem also gets at the way, all the multiple ways in which stepmotherland can apply. Because I think what you're saying, is just that like the stepmotherland is the country, is like your country, like in a relationship to your country as America now, like versus, your country of Panama now being you're of both places. But it's also what you're saying about like Blackness as a stepmotherland, American Blackness, right? Yeah. Because you are visually coded as American, like Black, but then when people hear you speak Spanish, it's just like, what's going on? Like, you know what I mean? That people remember, oh, they're surprised, or they remember that Black people like can be Latinx too, Yeah, totally. And so I'm wondering if you can kind of like talk about like the stepmothers of this book and how you use the language to engage with them. Because the thing I love about like Ferguson USA and like that you're really embodying just like that Blackest art of the way we remix language and the way that we can literally put 50 meanings in like 2 words, Mm-hmm. And so I'm just wondering if you can like talk about the way that you use language to like play with your stepmother's lands.
Yeah, absolutely. I would say that there's a bit of disidentification that's happening. If we think about Esteban Munoz, the now deceased performance art scholar who coined that term as a way for people who are oppressed, especially people of color, who take the culture that they're given, right, to carve a space out of it just for themselves, right? And queer culture does that as well with drag performance. And, so there's drag in the book. And I think of queer culture as a kind of stepmotherland. I think of U.S. American Blackness as a kind of stepmotherland for me. And you see that in the Ferguson USA poem. You see it in completely different ways in African Americanized and in African Clan Suit, as well as in The Art of Diplomacy. I think another stepmotherland is the narrow lens of U.S. Latinidad, which is, if you look at the history of Latinx studies, it comes from Chicanx studies. And so there is this preoccupation primarily with the Chicano and the Mexican American experience as the Latin experience, as the Latin American experience. And, I try to speak to that with poems like OTM, Other Than Mexican, and Poder, also thinking about Central American migration. So I think of U.S. Latinidad as also a kind of stepmotherland that I've had to navigate, negotiate, become a part of, be erased by, sometimes fight to be seen by, sometimes I'm welcomed by, sometimes I'm celebrated by, like with this prize, right? But it's always this negotiation that has to happen. And so I do think of it as stepmotherland. And it's largely because all of these places are places of danger and safety, right? So I'm able to find freedom, but it's a landmine. It's a landmine to find that freedom in that space often. So it's always a little bit of an awkward fit, and it always takes labor. It always takes some work to be free.
Amen to that. I think that this is a good time to like really dive into the way you're using language, because Stepmotherland is a book that uses both English and Spanish, and use like mixes the two a fair amount. And so, but it is clearly it's a book for all readers. And I'm curious about like how that, like, for you, the difference between, I think that like the thing I like about the way you use it is the prioritizing like appearing in context versus necessarily being like understood, and the way, like, if there is such a thing. And so I'm curious if you can just like literally just like talk about like to be of two languages, to be able to write in both, but talk about how you balance and when, and like, and how do you know which to lean towards, and when do you grasp for one versus the other?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm a fan of studies around neurology, the brain, the psychology of narrative, the psychology of language, all of those things. And I remember being in graduate school and learning about how the more languages that you speak, the more stimulated your brain is by language, according to CAT scans and these different scans of the brain. And remember, I read this stuff for fun. I'm not a neurologist or anything like that. But and that was kind of liberating, because I've always felt like another side of myself, like another voice. I have this other voice in Spanish. And a lot of people who are multilingual, I've heard them say the same thing. Like, they sound different, not just in terms of their voice, but also their point of view. And it often has to do with your vocabulary. And also how descriptive that other language might be. And in my case, Spanish is an incredibly descriptive language, right? And it has, I have a different relationship to it because it's one that I was immersed in. And when I was growing up, English was always around me, but English was always kind of a privileged language, to be honest. It was, the more education you had in Panama, the more access to higher level learning you had, the more likely you were to speak Spanish, to speak English, excuse me. So if you went to college, if you went to graduate school, especially if you studied abroad. And I don't just mean in the United States. If you studied abroad in Italy, if you studied abroad in France, chances are that your knowing English was a step towards getting access to that other kind of education. Or education in that different setting. And so every time that I'm trying to go home, which for me, writing some of these poems, especially the ones that are in the first part of the book, I was really trying to go home. I had to bring in Spanish, because when I was at home, that's what home sounded like, And that said, my grandfather used to speak to me in patois. My grandfather spoke to me in Creole. I have French Caribbean heritage as well. And so none of that actually made it into the book. This one, maybe the next one, And, my grandfather was such a beloved figure in my life. That's why I dedicated one of the first poems in the book to him. But I always grew around my home for me, I'm sorry, I'm getting super into this conversation, but home for me is all of these languages coming together. So there's no way that I could have written a book about going home, leaving home, building home, looking for home, finding new homes, any of those things without having more than one language at play.
Amazing, thank you. I think this is a great time to hear you read some more poems.
Sure. This poem is dedicated to my father, who retired just a few years ago from the Panama Canal, from his work in the Panama Canal. Ode to my father, the captain. Praise be to my father. Glory be to his never blinking eyes, wide open in solidarity with the unstoppable water flow between oceans and the endlessly swift airstreams in the sky. Ever alert, armed only with his compass and memorized maps of the stars. He pilots the ship through locks in the Panama Canal to turn tides on a dime in the dance of trade and unlock the earth's many ancient water routes. Honor be to my father for keeping us worldly with rubber cargo from Indonesia for our sneaker soles, and tantalizing tantalite cargo from Brazil for our iPhones in a world where people are defined by their crazy love of foreign things. Praise be to the captain's pepper tongue, speaking orders in an island-infused English to the ship's home squad, while also speaking a smooth sailing Spanish to his canal crew of good time guy Panama master pilots. For navigating the planet's sea of tongues with style and the graceful tonetics of an articulate diplomat, as any Black man who is among the first captains of his kind would have to do. Praise to the giants on whose shoulders my father stands, to the shackled gallants packed top to bottom and shipped in galleons from Badagry or Cape Coast Castle to West Indian plantations, and then to our isthmus to build and labor our canal. To the ancestors who guide my father when his motors break with their celestial steering, with a gentle push from their hands of sky, just as he guides me to steer my Black man body past us having once been considered cargo, past his now commanding a foreign cargo ship, to me one day becoming the wind sifting through all sails, to my one day becoming the water through which all ships must navigate, to my one day becoming the dark matter from which the stars hang at night, illuminating the way home for all who have strayed or been stolen. And now, kind captain, go home to rest. The last boost of coffee has rained down from your thermos flask and washed through your blood to mine. You who cruise the moon around the world so tight, rest sweetly as you sail home tonight. And now we are going to play an audio track for my poem, Lynx, from my book, Stepmotherland. It's a little premature there. Okay.
Slave sugar, rum, sweet liquor, licorice, black, brown cane, back, broken, bent, over, edge, under, water on deck, links. Links. Shackle chains, thunder, storms, hard rain, sleet, snow, shine, soul by the pine, links. Links. Journey cake, Johnny cake, baker's bag, ginger root children, good when dead, links. Links. Slave, sugar, freedom, back we drink drunk, marry me, Eula, I ain't no punk, links. Links. Ask, claim, force, marry, cheat, divorce, ring, run, mulatto, white, cotton, sun, sugar, rum, and links. Links. Charming, charming cherry, charming, charming Paul, patch them up, ship them, then again, trade them all. Links. 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 Links.
Thank you so much. It's amazing. So, yeah, I love this poem. And for those who can't see, let me see, like each line looks like that, each page. And so formally, it's a very interesting poem, which is also why I wanted you to read it. But can you just like walk us through that poem? What it's about, the construction. I know it's like asking what a poem is about, but just walk us through it. Yeah.
Well, what you just heard was this poem as a clapping game. And I came up with that after writing the poem that you see on the page. And I was in a cab. You remember those before Uber and Lyft? I was in a yellow New York City cab, and I was looking at this poem on the way to the Nuyorican Poets Cafe where I was going to read it. And the melody came into my head. Slave, sugar, rum, sweet, liquor, licorice, black, brown, cane, back, broken, bent, over, edge, under, water, on deck, links. Links. And I saw these kids just playing this game. And, you know, it's so funny that I'm reading this and talking to you about it after the things that I said about Ferguson USA. But the reason why it follows Ferguson USA in the book is because it also comes from this space of childhood in terms of its form, right? In terms of the audio track. Now, what we see on the page is one chain link that goes across multiple pages, because I had to think about slaves, sugar, rum. Right. These were the most traded items along the transatlantic slave trade. People, sugar, and rum. And then I went into sweet, liquor, licorice, black, brown, cane, sugar cane, back, broken, bent. And it just started to build from there. Whenever I teach spoken word, I always tell my students, you know, one exercise, one way to approach it is to find a beat. And then once you find the beat, to then hear the sound. And then once you hear the sound, to then find the words that match that sound. And so that's how this poem came together for me. And it's one that I'm really excited to share, especially as this audio track, which I developed while I was in Berlin with the producer and rapper LMNZ. And you hear some saxophone on the track. I'm classically trained as a saxophonist, and so I had to pull out my saxophone and do my thing, you know, thinking about Gil Scott-Heron also as a reference, and jazz poets and soul poets as well. So, yeah, that's what it is for me.
Thank you, Dara. I love the idea of you pulling out your saxophone. I love it. So I can't believe we're almost running out of time. So I want to have you read a couple more poems to close out, but there's one more question I want to get to. So I'm gonna make a big bridge from what you just said to this next question. So it's interesting. I'm so glad you talked about it, because like slave, sugar, rum, so essentially bodies, sweets, and alcohol. I mean, you're essentially wrapping up in those three words how the beginning of so much is wrapped around desire, right? Like, and how violent it can be. And then turning it, and then it just like, and then so that we hear it, because then like the violence of that desire, it kind of like dissipates into a child's game, you know, the way so much of the violence in this country does in order for it to keep procreating itself. But I think that like desire in this book happens in so many different ways. There's a desire of faith. There's a desire of being understood. There's a desire of family, but there's also like, just like, you know, bodies in desire with each other, you know, in all forms. And I think, and there's also, you know, the way humor functions in like inside these poems is like, there's like, that is a desire for joy, you know? And so I'm just hoping that you can kind of, and I know how much like desire is like the way you engage with it as a writer. So can you speak to just like desire in your work?
Yeah, totally. You know, for me, whenever I write with desire in mind, I'm thinking about Audre Lorde and the politics of the erotic. I'm thinking about Carl Phillips, particularly his book, The Rest of Love, and the way that he even finds, he uses syntax as a way to create suspense, right? And to delay gratification. I think that there's something really powerful about those writers and their approaches to poetry with that in mind. And I try to echo them. I think that there's something also inherently queer about the way that desire is navigated in this text, not just in queer desire itself, but then also in the queering of other kinds of desire, like the desire for the immigrant who's come to the United States to go back home, right? That's a kind of queering of the American dream, for example. And so I think that there's many ways that this book is about drive, right? And it's about dreaming. And essential to both of those things is desire, is to want change, is to want more, right? And is to finally reach this place of pleasure where you're safe.
Yeah, and I love what you're saying, because I think that the way like the queerness, another level of how it operates is, I think how we were talking earlier about the melding of languages, right? That you're bringing in all these languages together. And I think that there is, you know, there's a queerness in like what you like and how that like the care required, because, you know, language is often a place of violence, but it's also a place of care, and queerness requires so much care, you know? And so I just want to know if there's anything you wanted to say about that, because I know like offline we've been talking about, you know, about some of this stuff. So in case you want to close us out on any of those comments.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, I think of the way that Spanish and other language, including colloquialism and African American vernacular, is used in this book. It's it's queering the tradition of the English language poem in the American tradition in the contemporary American tradition of poetry. And so the use of macaronic language in itself is a kind of queering. And I think that that's only appropriate because I see these poems as places that can, the use of this language can alienate some readers, but it can also make some readers feel at home, the same way how I have felt as a part of this empire, essentially, alienated from my homeland, by my desires to come to the United States, by my American dream. And I've also felt a tremendous freedom that it's provided for me as well. And so I think that that's baked into the use of the macaronic language, of the mixed language, of the multilingualism that's operating here. And I think that it's also a kind of double and triple consciousness that's at play for people like you and me.
Thank you so much, Daryl. And to close us out, I was hoping you could read 2 more poems for everyone. Thank you.
Absolutely. This poem is called Black Parade. Coming out isn't the same as coming to America, except for the welcome parade put on by ghosts like your grand uncle Hector, who came to New York from Panama in the 50s and was never heard of again, and by the beautiful gays who died of AIDS in the 80s, whose cases your mother studied in nursing school. She sent you to the US to become an American, and you worry she'll blame this country for making you a marica, a Mary, like it might have made your uncle Hector. The words America and marica are so similar. Exchange a few vowels and turn anyone born in this country queer. I used to watch Queer as Folk as a kid and dream of sashaying away the names bullies called me in high school for being Black but not Black enough, or the kind of Black they saw on TV. Blackish, negro, claro, hueco. It was a predominantly white school, the kind of white the Spanish brought to this continent when they cozened my ancestors from Africa. There was no welcome parade for my ancestors back then, so they made their own procession, called it Carnaval, and fully loaded the streets with egungun costumes, holy bata drum rhythms, shouting and screaming in tongues, and booty dancing in the spirit. I don't want to disappear in New York City, lost in a drag of straightness. So instead, I proceed to introduce my mother to my first boyfriend after I'd moved her to Texas and helped make her a citizen. Living is trafficking through ghosts in a constant march toward a better life, welcoming the next in line. Thriving is winding the perreo to soca on the Noah's Ark Pride Parade float, like you're the femme bottom in an early aughts gay TV show. Surviving is cross-dressing as an American marica until you're a Murica or a Murica and your ancestors see you're the king, queen of Mardi Gras, purple scepter, crown, and crew. And lastly, I'll read the poem Homecoming. Thank you again, Hafiza, Francisco, the Writer Center, Poet Laureate, and you for tuning in. Homecoming. Our mother always wanted me to go to an HBCU, but I never even applied, too afraid I wasn't Black enough. Tupac quoting, hip hop standoffs, Tyler Perry marathon watching, cafeteria grits loving crews, debating whether to add hot sauce or sugar or cheese. It was all Greek to me, culture written in the tongue of someone else's empire. But then my boss, Miss Daisy, called me King Kong. And it was just another gunshot echoed, bleeding through the clouds, soaking the sky in unscalable sound. I let it bleed until the birds fell from the sky, until we believed God had sent yet another plague. But then Jerome taught me Baby Love by the Supremes, and the ways Diana and her girls dared to Detroit the radio and signify to the Black stations they were colored, and to the white stations that they were safe. But then Carl taught me American Beauty red roses and Hallmark Valentine Day greeting cards, and how it's the thought that counts when the whole world is made of symbols. And right then I saw that all along, I had mistaken my spade for a big spoon. And I too, by the world and its pop culture, had been raced, though not erased, somewhere between Beyonce concert documentaries and Chitlins. I had graduated Migration University and finally become someone's bae, someone's homie, someone's N-word, someone's son.
Thank you so much, Daryl. And thank you to everyone out there for joining us. I highly encourage everyone to go buy Stepmotherland. It is an amazing book. And I also encourage people to check out Daryl's website at darylholness.com. You can find out about his other work as a playwright. I'm going to see if I can get him to upload some saxophone for everyone. But thank you so much for joining us.